adrift in a sea of fleeting pleasures. The nights were long and filled with a hollow sense of satisfaction that never lasted. The days were even longer, filled with regret and a yearning for something more, something real. His name was John, and he was trapped in the labyrinth of sexual addiction. It was a maze with no clear exit, each turn leading him deeper into a world he desperately wanted to escape, but couldn't find the strength to leave. Each day began with a promise of change, a vow to be better, to break free from the chains that bound him. Yet each night ended in the familiar embrace of shame, the cycle repeating itself with a cruel consistency. The internet had become his drug of choice, a portal to endless gratification. It was always there, always available, offering an escape from the reality he found so unbearable. Pornography was his constant companion, a cruel mistress whispering sweet lies. It promised pleasure but delivered only pain, leaving him feeling more isolated and disconnected than ever before. John craved connection, intimacy, and love. He longed for a touch that was real, for a relationship that went beyond the superficial. But the more he sought solace in his addiction, the further he drifted from the very things he desired. But the path he had chosen led only to emptiness and despair. It was a road paved with broken promises and shattered dreams, a journey that took him further from the light with each passing day. His relationships suffered, his work suffered, and his spirit withered under the weight of his secret life. Friends and family noticed the change in him, but he pushed them away, afraid of their judgment, afraid of their pity. He was a king in exile, his throne usurped by the tyranny of his desires. Once confident and full of potential, he now felt like a shadow of his former self, a ruler dethroned by his own weaknesses. The light of his true potential flickered dimly within him, threatening to be extinguished by the encroaching darkness. He knew he was capable of so much more, but the addiction clouded his vision, making it hard to see a way out. He was caught in a vicious cycle, a prisoner of his own making. Each attempt to break free seemed to tighten the chains, each failure reinforcing the belief that he was beyond saving. John knew he needed to break free, but the chains of addiction held him fast. They were like iron shackles, heavy and unyielding, binding him to a life he no longer wanted to live. He yearned for a way out, a lifeline to pull him from the depths of his despair. He dreamed of a day when he could look in the mirror and see a man he was proud of, a man who had conquered his demons. Hope seemed like a distant star, a faint glimmer in the vast expanse of his loneliness. It was there, but so far away, almost unreachable. Yet it was this tiny spark of hope that kept him going, that made him believe change was possible. But deep down, a voice whispered of a different path, a path of strength, discipline and self-mastery. It spoke of a future where he was no longer a slave to his desires, where he could reclaim his life and his dignity. The question was, would he listen? Would he find the courage to take that first step, to seek help, to admit he couldn't do it alone? The journey ahead was daunting, but the promise of a better life was worth the struggle. The consequences of John's addiction were far-reaching, casting a long shadow over every aspect of his life. It wasn't just a personal battle, it was a war that affected everyone around him. His family, friends and colleagues all felt the ripple effects of his struggle. His once bright eyes now held a haunted look, the spark of joy replaced by a dull ache of emptiness. The light that used to shine so brightly in his eyes was now dimmed, overshadowed by the weight of his addiction. His energy, once vibrant and boundless, had dwindled to a mere flicker. The zest for life that once defined him was now a distant memory, replaced by a constant state of fatigue and lethargy. He felt drained, depleted, and utterly exhausted. Every day was a struggle to find the strength to carry on, to face the world with even a semblance of normalcy. His relationships suffered the most. Friends who once enjoyed his company now found it difficult to be around him. The laughter and camaraderie were replaced by awkward silences and strained conversations. Intimacy had become a performance, a hollow imitation of true connection. The emotional distance between him and his partner grew wider with each passing day, creating a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. He couldn't look his partner in the eye, the guilt and shame forming an impenetrable barrier between them. The trust that once formed the foundation of their relationship was now shattered, replaced by suspicion and doubt. Loneliness became his constant companion, a heavy cloak he couldn't shake off. His work performance plummeted. The isolation he felt was suffocating, making it difficult to find solace or comfort in anything. He couldn't focus, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of his next fix. The addiction consumed his thoughts, leaving little room for anything else. His productivity at work suffered, and his once promising career was now in jeopardy. Deadlines were missed, opportunities squandered, and his dreams of success seemed to slip further away with each passing day. The goals he once aspired to achieve now seemed unattainable, lost in the haze of his addiction. The once promising young man was now a shadow of his former self, his potential slowly being eroded by his addiction. The vibrant, ambitious individual he used to be was now buried under layers of despair and hopelessness. The price of pleasure was proving to be far too high. The temporary relief he sought through his addiction came at the cost of his well-being, his future, and his very essence. John was paying for it with his health, his relationships, and his very soul. The toll it took on his body was evident in his gaunt appearance and constant state of exhaustion. He knew he couldn't continue down this destructive path, but the pull of addiction was strong. The internal battle raged on, a constant struggle between the desire to break free and the overwhelming urge to succumb. He was caught in a downward spiral, and he desperately needed to find a way to reverse course before it was too late. The hope for redemption was faint, but it was still there, a glimmer of light in the darkness that surrounded him. One fateful evening, as John stared at his reflection in the mirror, he felt a deep sense of unease. The man looking back at him seemed distant, almost unrecognizable. It was as if he was peering into the eyes of a stranger, someone who had lost his way. A profound realization washed over him. He saw not the man he wanted to be, but a shadow of his former self. The dreams and aspirations he once held dear had been buried under layers of regret and missed opportunity. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. Each poor decision, each moment of weakness had added to the burden he now carried. It was a crushing load, one that seemed almost impossible to bear. In that moment of raw honesty, John made a decision. He would reclaim his life. He would no longer be a prisoner of his past mistakes. Instead, he would forge a new path, one that led to redemption and self-discovery. The journey wouldn't be easy, he knew, but a flicker of hope ignited within him, a small but persistent flame that refused to be extinguished. It was this hope that would guide him through the darkest of times. Fueled by a deep yearning for change, John resolved to confront his inner demons. He had spent years suppressing his true self, hiding behind a facade of confidence and control. But now he was ready to face the truth. The king within him, buried beneath layers of shame and self-loathing, was beginning to stir. John could feel the stirrings of his true potential, the man he was always meant to be. It was time to let that man emerge. He would break free from the chains of addiction and step into his power. No longer would he be held captive by his vices. He would rise above them, stronger and more determined than ever before. The first step was the hardest. He deleted his browser history, purging the digital remnants of his past. It felt like severing a limb, a painful but necessary amputation. Each click of the mouse was a step towards freedom. As he watched the files disappear, a sense of liberation washed over him. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He was letting go of the past, making room for a brighter future. John knew he couldn't move forward while clinging to the shadows of his past. He had to make a clean break, to sever the ties that bound him to his old life. It was a difficult decision, but one that he knew was necessary. He made a solemn vow to himself, a promise to honor his body, mind, and spirit. He would treat himself with the respect and care he deserved. No longer would he neglect his own well-being. He would no longer be a slave to his desires. He would become the master of his own destiny. Each day would be a step towards self-improvement, a journey towards becoming the best version of himself. This was his turning point, the moment he decided to fight for his life, his freedom, and his future. He would embrace the challenges ahead, knowing that each struggle would bring him closer to his goal. The king was beginning to awaken. John could feel the transformation taking place within him. It was a slow and arduous process, but one that filled him with a sense of purpose and determination. He was ready to reclaim his throne, to become the man he was always meant to be. John knew that to conquer his addiction, he needed to build a fortress around his mind, a sacred shield to protect him from the relentless onslaught of temptation. He began by identifying his triggers, the situations and environments that fueled his desires. He recognized the danger zones, the online spaces where lust lurked in the shadows. He made a conscious decision to avoid these triggers, choosing instead to fill his life with light and positivity. He unfollowed accounts that promoted objectification and sought out content that nourished his soul. He replaced mindless scrolling with enriching activities, immersing himself in books, podcasts, and documentaries that expanded his mind and uplifted his spirit. John understood that his body was his temple, and he treated it with newfound respect. He nourished himself with healthy foods, fueling his body with vitality and strength. He embraced the power of movement, engaging in physical activities that released endorphins and cleared his mind. Each day, he practiced mindfulness, cultivating awareness of his thoughts and emotions. He learned to observe his cravings without judgment, acknowledging them as fleeting sensations rather than commands to be obeyed. John was building a foundation of discipline and self-control, brick by brick, thought by thought. He was becoming the architect of his own transformation.